Now that fascism had taken control of the main nations of the Axis powers, it spread to other countries in Europe. In France, the National Assembly gave full power to Marshal Philippe Pétain, who changed the regime into the non-democratic form of government. The fascist state of France was ruled by the Vichy government, which aided Germany throughout the war. France even aided the collection of Jewish people, not just in captured territory, but in all of France. The police force went on roundups and raids to collect the Jews for Germany to put in their concentration camps. Concentration camps were even put to use within France. The Vichy government also imitated the radical policies of the Third Reich. Spain endured a civil war starting in June 1936. The nationalists fought for control of the nation with support from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy. The nationalists, led by Francisco Franco, overthrew the democratically elected Second Republic in 1939, taking over Spain in favor of the Axis powers. The nation then sent military aid to Germany to help fight the Russians on the Eastern Front. Spain never became an active participant in the war, as the nation was still recovering from its civil war. However, they would have joined the Axis powers if Germany was able to provide Spain with enough materials and military equipment. While tensions rose in Europe, America was making an effort to stay neutral and leave the potential conflict within Europe. To ensure that the U.S. couldn't be dragged into the war, Congress passed a series of neutrality acts. The Neutrality Act of 1935 allowed the president to prohibit arms shipments and forbid U.S. citizens to travel on the ships of warring nations. The Neutrality Act of 1936 forbade the extension of loans and credits to belligerent nations. Finally, the Neutrality Act of 1937 forbade the shipment of arms to the opposing sides in Spain. Franklin Roosevelt signed these acts reluctantly. He would later try to repeal these acts in order to sell arms to nations in Europe, but Congress denied this. As fascism spread to France and Spain, America was initially isolationist and tried to stay out of the possible conflict with neutrality acts.
I researched the Quarantine on Aggression. The Quarantine on Aggression was a speech delivered by Franklin Delano Roosevelt on October 5, 1937. In this speech, he outlined ideas such as the spread of aggression in Europe and growing conflict with countries such as Germany that were mobilizing and preparing for war. During this time period, there were debates about whether or not the United States should involve themselves in the conflicts of Europe or continue to promote isolationism. Isabella will discuss that later. In his speech, he vaguely alluded to the fact that the United States may have to become involved in the growing conflict and that they could not turn a blind eye to aggression because it could affect their own nation's stability. After this speech, it became a main tipping point that pushed Americans towards wanting to become involved in the conflict in Europe. I also researched the sinking of the Panay. The Panay was a U.S. river gunboat that was on the Yangtze River in China. On December 12, 1937, only a few months after the Quarantine on Aggression speech, that boat was sunk by Japanese bombers along with 3 Standard Oil tankers that were traveling along with the Panay for protection. Immediately after the bombing and after Franklin Delano Roosevelt caught word, he demanded an apology from the Japanese, saying that it was a planned attack on the United States. Because of this, it increased the anti-Japanese sentiment and helped President Franklin Delano Roosevelt take a firmer stand toward Japan. In 1938, a moral embargo stopped the sale of aircraft to Japan while increasing the U.S. Navy, fearing that a conflict with Japan was inevitable. As seen, this incident called for stronger measures to maintain neutrality throughout the world. To conclude, there were not only the physical events such as the sinking of the Panay and the Quarantine on Aggression speech, but it was mainly the undertones that were the strongest. With the sinking of the Panay, The Pan was sunk, but the main factor was that it increased racism in the United States against the Japanese and increased propaganda promoting against the Japanese. With the quarantine and aggression speech, it promoted the ideas that America would have to be involved in the growing conflict in Europe.